Dr. Jesse Talley, I'm excited to have you on the podcast. You are an associate professor, and why academia?
So that goes back to when I was younger. So my dad actually has his PhD. And so he had this expectation that all his children will also get PhDs. But during my, I guess you can say like elementary school all the way up until college, I participated in so many different programs as a result of him getting us into STEM, as well as my parents started a nonprofit called Joint Educational Facilities, where they taught like kids in K through 3 all the way up to going into college a little bit about different advanced computer topics or the computer. So that kind of started my journey in terms of interacting with people in different STEM fields and being introduced to them because of my dad. So once I finally got to college and I got to see how some people in my community necessarily didn't have kind of those connections in terms of if they wanted to go to STEM, they didn't have this access like I did because my dad interacted with those type of people all the time, so I got to meet them. And so even in the classroom being a TA, it kind of just sparked something in me like I want to be able to give back in the classroom in that way to my community. So that's why I'm in academia.
So you had early exposure, right? You had
Yes.
was your father also in academia?
Yes, he actually is still teaching now.
Oh,
Yes.
wow.
Yes, he's still teaching now. So he's been a part of it for a while.
Absolutely. So then
Yeah.
let's walk through your educational background.
Okay. So I did my bachelor's, my master's, and my PhD at North Carolina A&T State University. My BS at the time, the program was just called Industrial Engineering. And then for the master's and PhD, it switched over to Industrial and Systems Engineering. And so for my PhD specifically, I focused on operations research. So doing a lot of mathematical modeling and supply chain management work. Yeah.
That's great. That's great. So, you kind of answered why why academia for you. It's something you were exposed to earlier. It's something that you have an interest in,
Yeah.
and from interacting with you on LinkedIn, where this is where we met,
Yeah.
virtually. Um, I noticed that you have a soft spot for early career professors and in helping them establish their careers and ultimately get tenure. What led you to that?
It was my own experience. So I actually didn't start off on tenure track. I
Right.
actually started off as a lecturer for 2 years before I transitioned into a tenure track position at my institution, which is not typical at places. Normally, you'll have to just do the lecturer position at an institution and then go somewhere else and get a tenure track. But I was fortunate enough to stay at the same institution. And so while I was a lecturer, though, I still had the opportunity where I was able to do research, but because I was teaching so many classes, it wasn't helpful or beneficial for me to do that. But just seeing how making that transition into being on tenure track, which was a little bit easier for me because I had already been at the institution. I know if it was someone who was just that first year they were coming in, it would be very difficult to kind of manage creating classes, getting used to the culture, all that kind of stuff. And so I saw that as a result of, even though I didn't completely experience it because I had that kind of time to actually get used to everything before jumping into the research part. But I knew that that would be difficult for some people just coming straight out of school.
Right, right. And we'll talk a little bit about some of those difficulties. But for the sake of, a PhD student watching this, what is the difference between a lecturer and tenure track?
Yeah, so a lecturer is basically a person, they're kind of like a step up from an adjunct position because an adjunct is just maybe they're teaching one class, but you may have three or more classes and you may have like a contract where you could teach. It's renewable for about like 3 years sometimes. Sometimes they do it for 1 year, it just depends on where you are. And you don't necessarily get evaluated or anything. It just depends on the type of institution. And you also don't have to do research, but you can do research. So really your main focus is teaching the classes.
Right.
Whereas on tenure track, you have to kind of do everything now. You have to do the research, you have to do the advisement, and you may still do a little bit of advisement as a lecturer, but the main focus is teaching the classes for a lecturer.
Right, right, right. And what would you say apart from the differences that you described? What I guess the benefit if you really don't want to do research,
Right, right.
if you really don't
That's
want to
the
do research.
Yeah, that's a big benefit is if you want to be a lecturer, like you don't really want to do research, then a lecturer is probably the better way to go.
Right.
But you can still be connected to the students. So like even though I wasn't necessarily focusing on the research part, whenever there was like a senior design project, I could still be a part of that with the students and kind of do something research related. So you kind of have a little bit of flexibility to kind of create how you want that to look, but you just know you definitely have to teach all of the classes. So you can kind of put your feet in, get your feet wet in specific things if you're interested in it.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So that being said, thank you for that definition. That being said, let's move on to, when we were talking about why you got interested in mentoring these early career
Yeah.
faculty. What are the top three difficulties that you personally see with the people that you mentor, the early career faculty that you mentor?
So I think one of the main things is having a mentor, not necessarily on the outside. It's good to have one on the outside, but having somebody inside that you can kind of connect with that knows the law of the land. And sometimes your university may have a mentor, but you don't necessarily know if they're going to work out. And you want someone specifically in your department, if possible, or at least your school, that kind of knows how things work. And I know for me, it was a little difficult initially to find that person. Eventually, I did, but initially it was harder because I wasn't on tenure track at the time, but I was still trying to understand how things work. And so once I got connected with them, they were able to provide a little more insider information, I like to call it, about how things work. Another difficulty I would say is kind of what I alluded to earlier, which is about getting used to the culture. Like you have to get used to the culture. You have to get used to the teaching of the classes or creating like the classes before you get in, which most of the time you don't know till right before you're about to come. So those two things kind of make it difficult because you have to do that at the same time. You have to manage them. And so I hear a lot of new faculty tend to say like, this is difficult, or they find that they don't have enough time to work on things, or they're like, are you working on the weekend? I'm like, I try not to if I don't have to, you know what I'm saying? But it's kind of like you have to have that balance. Although I hate to say balance because you can never do it. I like to say more of integration because you want things to fit. Like everywhere should have like a place to fit that works with your lifestyle. And so getting them to kind of change their mindset in terms of that time and just like spend the first semester just getting used to being here, even though you're like, I gotta still do research, I gotta still do that, but it's like you gotta get used to being here first before you can do all of the things to try to get tenure. And so I see a lot of difficulty there as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And work life integration or work life balance is one of the reasons why people like me are super loud about careers outside of academia. So,
Yes.
for and it's real, right? So
Real.
clearly it's a difficulty. So for somebody that's listening to us and they're like on the fence and they're like, I really like what I do in academia, but I've been listening to Gertrude and she's telling me that there are all these jobs outside of academia. What would you tell them, right? Like, what would you tell them so that academia is an attractive option for them?
So for me personally, I have to always take some time to kind of reflect on where I am with respect to my academic journey. So like right now, I'm at the space where it's the in between of associate professor to move up to the next promotion, right? So that means I have to do some different things to get to that moment. So I have to go back and kind of reflect and look at where do I want to go, or how do I want this to look for me? Specifically in this season, which is probably good for other people, is you have to figure out what rest looks like to you. And I think that's no matter where you go, even if you decide to do something different, it's what does rest look like for me? What are going to be the times where I take like a Sabbath, or I have space to kind of recharge to be able to get back in the game? So for me personally, conferences do that, which I know is very weird because I get to be around a lot of the people I don't get to see, that are
Yeah.
either like mentors or like my close peers that are in my discipline, or just different people I've met along the way, who have been a part of my journey. And so when I'm able to see them, or doing something related to like, encouraging other early career faculty or PhD students, making those type of presentations at a conference too, those are the things that kind of re-energize me. And then I come back, I'm like, okay, I'm ready to go and get into doing this work. But if you haven't developed what that kind of rest schedule looks like, or your rhythm that is going to work for you, then no matter where you go, it's going to be difficult because you haven't taken that time to kind of come up with what it looks like for you personally.
Right.
And it is personal because some people I know, and I hate to say this too, because I do go and I look at a lot of people's ways of doing things, but sometimes it just doesn't work for you the way that their method is. It can get you started, which is good. You have a starting point, but you really have to sit down and kind of reflect on what actually works for your lifestyle to create something for yourself that's going to be sustainable.
And I think that is so important, right? Because by a lot of people's, I don't know about you, but I'm an action taker, right? Like I like to like just move and break things and then figure it out later. And there was a time in my life I used to be a little bit of a perfectionist, and that's gone. But because of this behavior, I think which I see in a lot of academics too, like we don't take the time to actually say, what do I want, right? What do
Right.
want out of my career? What do I want out of my life? And we just like go, go, go. And then we hit burnout and we're like, wait, how did I even get here? So I really love that you said, figure out what works for you, figure out what your rest schedule looks like, right? We're coming up on summer break. For some people, it's rest time. And for some professors, it's not, because this is the time they're trying to catch up with everything else, right? And so
Right.
it's really important to sit down and think about it. How do you personally, so apart from conferences, right? I know you also have a family, right? You're also a
Yeah.
family person. How are you handling that? Like how, and this is not just, I'm not asking this. The other day I saw something where people were like, why do we ask women how they're handling family and work? And
Yeah.
that's not the reason I'm asking this question. I would ask
Right.
a male this question as well. But
Mhm.
how are you doing it?
So that's a good question. One of my colleagues actually asked me that the other day because they look at me and they're like, "How do you do all of this stuff?" And you know what I told them? I said, "Sometimes I don't."
Right,
Like I said, I do, whatever I have the capacity for. So I use the example of, like, I think a week or two ago, my son was off for Easter break. So I
right.
said, "Now, I'm not getting anything done that week, not a whole lot anyway." And so I said, but I have to be okay with that, but also know that, based off of how some things work out for me, I get the time on the back end to
Right.
get it done. So some other time opens up for me. So it's not like I have a loss completely. It's just I have to designate specific times. So like maybe when he's taking his nap, I can get those 2 hours in to work on something. Or, when my husband comes home, then I can do some stuff later on. But it's like I'll eventually get a little bit of time back. But the time that he's here, or the time I need to spend with my family, I'll do that without feeling guilt. So that's very difficult to do as an academic, but I'm learning more and more, how to do that. And it becomes a little bit easier because it's like we don't, have that much time with our families, and we should be spending some time doing stuff that we like too. And it's just like, what are your values? What's important to you? That's one of the things that's important to me. And so it's like I gotta make that time and just know that time will eventually come back around for me to get it done. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So really, what kind of okay? So then this leads me to this question. I was going to ask you a completely different question, but now I'm like,
Okay.
what productivity habits do you regularly put in place for yourself? Because it sounds like your colleagues, like you have time for your family, you have time for rest. You're making sure that you're getting your academic work done, your academic responsibilities, which since you're tenure track, that means research, that means teaching, that means advising, right?
Yeah.
So what kind of productivity habits have been most helpful for you?
So I really love doing my planning meeting on Sundays. So I look at my schedule, like what's on there already, and then I kind of just like map that out a little bit more. But another thing that I kind of got away from, so I need to kind of bring it back in, was we and on our schedule for sometimes in acting, we know we're going to teach specific classes, so that's happening every week. We know probably with specific research projects we're on, we have specific meetings for that. So those I tend to put down. I know that they're set. But then I have other things outside of that, like if I want to connect with someone from a conference or connect with another colleague on something else, or I want to do service, which can really bog you down at times, right? That's when it's like outside of that time. And so something I had implemented a little early on, which I have to implement back again, was to limit those two things. So like extra outside meetings and then outside service to like one or two extra things a month. Because what I was finding was that I had these back to back to back to back days, and I'm like, when can I eat? When can I, take a pause? And I'm like, I don't want it to be like that. But when I implemented, like, okay, I'm only going to take on this amount extra, then that kind of like cut that down drastically as a result of doing that, because it's like I have to make sure whatever I'm doing is alignment with the next promotion as well. So something I like, but is in alignment with the promotion as well, because we don't want to do double work.
Right.
So yeah.
So it sounds to me like you are intentional about what you do not let on your calendar as much as what you let on your calendar.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because time is valuable. And I don't think we always think about it like that, but it's like your time is valuable. You can't get it back.
Right.
It's almost like currency.
It is more than I think time is more than currency, right? The way somebody put it into perspective for me was if let's say somebody gave you $1 million today, but they
Right.
said you only had today to spend that money because tomorrow you won't be here, you'd be
Right.
like, no, I'd rather get more time than get all this money. Well, I don't know.
Yes.
Everybody else,
Yes.
I don't know about everybody else, but
Absolutely. No,
yeah, I'd rather
absolutely.
have more time than have the money just to spend today, right? And so
Right.
time is definitely more valuable than money. Every other Friday, I send out an email newsletter to about 3,000 PhDs and academics on tips, tools, and resources that you can use to build a career you love. And I'm inviting you to join us. You can go to theboldphd.com/careers list. Again, that's theboldphd.com/careers list. Let's get back into the episode. What's a misconception that people like me have about academia? Let's go there.
Oh my goodness. I'm trying to think. I don't know. So I mean, based off of what you said earlier, it's really a perspective thing and what you experience. So I can't say that you all completely have a misconception, because a lot of what people who have left, like that's really real. What you all have experienced, like that's true about the academy. But I think it's just based off of what you experience. That's kind of the perspective that you're going to take. But it doesn't mean that that's the complete picture of how it looks, right? Like you said earlier, because someone else may have had like a better experience. But I think it's good to have both perspectives, because someone come and listen to me, like you said, they may feel like, oh, well, she's not talking about the bad side, or what people may deem as the bad side. But it's like, no, like you need a complete picture. And so even though I talk about what I do, I also mentioned about that too on the flip side. Like it's just like kind of any other job. Like it has its pros and its cons, right? But
That's
you have to determine if you're willing to kind of go this route and deal with, those things that may come up in academia that you might be hearing some of the other people saying that's real, that
right.
does happen. Like, are you okay with that? And if you're not, then maybe you need to reconsider. Maybe
Right.
you need to go on the other side. So that's kind of like a personal thing, though. You
Mm-hmm.
really have to sit down and figure out if it's for you. And I think I've been in academia long enough that I'm kind of used to the space,
Mm-hmm.
maybe compared to some other people. And so I've learned a lot. I think I learned a lot more going through the graduate work than you do undergrad because you
Right.
are so connected to the professors and the inner workings of the department. And so you tend to kind of get a little more knowledge with respect to how it works. So that's what I would say. But it
Yeah.
is nice. I mean, you get to do your research, you get to work with the students. You can focus in on what you want to, and like you said earlier, you kind of gotta figure out, which is the stage I'm at now, because getting through tenure, you're just trying to do what you need to do to get to tenure. But
Right.
now, when you have tenure, you have to think more about like your legacy. Like, what do you want your legacy to look like in terms of academia? Like, what do you want to focus on now that you want to put more energy into? And so that's kind of the phase that I'm in now.
So for those early, so thank you for that response. I just want to say that I've had this conversation with another academic. So I remember in the early days, because I started this whole double PhD somewhere in 2020. I remember the very early days, somebody reached out to me and she was like, "Hey, why do you keep on saying that jobs in academia are underpaid? I make six figures, right?" And I was like, "Thank you for sharing that with me." But that's not everybody's experience. And actually,
Right.
I was when I came out of my postdoc and I was laid off, but when I was looking for academic jobs, there was no assistant professor
Right.
job that was six figures. There was no assistant professor job that, in fact, there were assistant professor jobs I saw that paid less than my postdoc,
Yeah.
right? And so that was the experience I had faced. And so I was like, I'm not trying to steal from your experience. And I think that this is really
Right.
important to point out that just because somebody shares what they went through or their perspective doesn't take away from somebody else's positive experience, right?
Yeah.
So if you're having,
Exactly.
like, for instance, working outside of academia, I've also heard people say, "Oh, this is not intellectually stimulating. This doesn't sound intellectually stimulating." And I'm like, "Well, I beg to differ. It's very intellectually stimulating for me." So I think that, in talking about all these, there are nuances, right? And it's important to, that's one of the reasons I want to talk to you is like, get
Yeah.
both sides and then decide that this is the line I want to toe,
Right.
and whatever the pros and cons are, I've accepted that those are the pros and cons I'm going to experience on this path. Because on the flip side, right, there are aspects of of people that have on the tenure track that I absolutely admire. For instance, well, I don't know if it's true. You can tell me this. I don't know if it's completely true, but I feel like when you get tenure, it's almost impossible for you to lose your job. Is that still true? Do you feel?
I think for the most part, yes. But given kind of like the climate now, I think they're taking a look at that. So some people are trying to do away with tenure and all that kind of stuff. So, but I think for right now, until they really move forward on stuff that they're trying to put out there, yes, you have to really do something, whatever, to lose it. So yeah,
For those people who are maybe they're postdoc and they want to get tenure, what
yeah.
what advice, what should they start doing right now to help them?
So, well, they're doing a good thing right now because they're doing more research. So that's always a plus. So having a strong research program or like the research that you want to focus on to be able to kind of share that when you go and prepare for like interviews and stuff like that. So that's a big thing. Knowing the type of classes that you're able to teach that they can kind of drop you in, and the more classes, the better, because then they know they can kind of move you in and out if need be. The other thing would be I think you have to do some research on the type of institution that you want to go to. So
Let's
that's really
let's talk about
that's
that.
number one.
Yeah.
That's really number one. And then being able to kind of like start understanding like that culture, or the way that things are set up, how your department works. Because I like to say that even when you go through an interview, you do not really get all the information about your department unless you have someone when you come in and they're, willing to share. But
Right.
you really don't experience everything until you get there. That's when you really see how things are, right? And so you should try to do as much question asking to get some of those questions answered or get a feel for people during the interview as much as possible. So don't say you don't have questions. You definitely have questions for them, because they're interviewing you, but you're interviewing them, because this is somewhere you will be spending your time. So, yeah.
Two follow-up questions.
Hmm.
Let's explain the different types of institutions there are, just for knowledge purposes, and then
Yeah.
I want to talk about what kind of questions should you ask if you do land a tenure track interview.
So
So
you Yeah, so you definitely have your R1 institution. So if you love research, you don't really like to teach as much, although maybe you might have to do one class or something like that, but it's probably more aligned with your research anyway. Then that will be the type of institution that you go to. Then you have your R2. So the institution that I'm at right now is R2, but they started off as like a teaching university, which may be like a R3 or something like that. But so we do a little bit of the research and the teaching, and so you kind of have to balance through that. So you may have a higher teaching load at some of those. And then you'll have, like I said, the teaching institutions. You also have institutions that just are undergrad. So that means you may not have graduate students to do your research. You'll have to do undergraduate research. Um, and then I'm at an HBCU specifically, but you have that, your private versus your public institutions as well. So you just have to see, where you might want to go that fits what you want to do. So, like I said, if you want to do more research, you got to go to one of those type of institutions. If you don't mind having the mix, then you can go there. If you just want to do teaching, you can go to a teaching institution. But even at like a R2, even if you still want to be a lecturer, like we talked about earlier, you could still go to any one of those institutions to do that as well. Yeah.
and then for those people that are lucky enough to land a tenure track interview, right, for their first professor position, what kind of questions should they be asking when they go in those interviews?
So if you are watching this and you reach out to me, I have a list of questions I can send to you.
Okay.
But you should have questions for each type of person that you'll see. So meaning like your department chair, you may want to ask them more about questions about the department, how things are run, all that kind of stuff. And maybe you'll ask them a little bit more about like what will happen after you come, or even like what's going to happen after you finish your interview, right? So they can tell you stuff like that. Then you have the different individual professors that you'll meet with. So that can give you just more of a sense of how the department is, how people interact a little bit, what they're interested in, to see if you can connect in terms of research. And they may just be able to tell you other stuff if you ask about like where you live, what's around, all that kind of stuff. And then you have, sometimes you'll get to see the dean. Maybe it just depends on if they're there. Then you can just kind of ask them more about where do they see things going, and what they're going to have coming down the pike in terms of the school and different initiatives and things of that nature. And then normally they have like a person that'll take you out anyway, like a realtor or something like that, that can speak to like getting a house and all that kind of stuff. But you can still ask that to the people in the department as well. So those are like some of the questions off the top of my head that you can. And you can even ask the professors about the students too, like how do they interact with them, like how many students do they have, stuff like that. Yeah.
Should you talk to the students too if you see them?
Yes, if you're able to. I did have one interview that they did have a few students, undergrad and grad, to come in and sit and talk with me. And sometimes they'll even make you do like teach a class. So then you'll get to interact with them and you can kind of see how that feels, if you're able to do that as well. So that will give you a sense of how it feels in the classroom there.
Yeah. Hey, did you know that I speak to and train groups at universities, colleges, and professional organizations on the topics I cover on this channel? I do. So if your group would like to bring me in virtually or in person to cover intentional career design, personal branding that builds your career, careers within scientific communications or biotech, go to theboldphd.com/speaking. So for the people listening, whether you're listening to this on audio or you watch this on YouTube, reach out to Dr. Jess. Do you have a link that they can go to download the questions, or should they just reach out to you?
They can reach out to me, but you just gave me an idea that I need to just put a link out there so they'll be able to get those questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can just reach out to me.
Okay. All right. If you do create the link after this conversation, give it to me, and then I can add it to
Okay.
the episode
Absolutely.
later on. Yeah, absolutely. So, what's a counter into? I know this question is going to be a little bit controversial, maybe, but
Okay.
what's a counterintuitive lesson you've learned in your professional life so far?
Hmm. A counterintuitive lesson.
Maybe you expected it to look one way, but it's been a different experience.
So I will say you probably might hear this from a lot of people in academia, but every time you kind of reach a milestone, like when you finish your dissertation defense, and the same thing with tenure, like I was excited about it, but it's still a little anticlimactic when you get there, right? So it's still the same thing. I know that's bad to say because it's like now I gotta keep on doing what I've been doing. So it's like, okay, now what am I gonna do next? I gotta figure this out. So it doesn't really feel like, oh yeah, I got tenure. It does for like a day, and then it's like, okay, you gotta get back to the grind and figure out what this next phase is going to look like. So I think that one thing, and then even for, like I said, where I am now, which I want to start kind of documenting this a little bit more too. It's like you almost feel like, which I didn't think was going to happen. You almost feel like once you get to associate professor, or me, I can speak for myself. It feels like you're starting over again from the beginning, almost like you on tenure track again. And I did talk to one of my mentors, and I told him that. He said, "Yeah, it does kind of feel like that in a way." And I'm like, "Why? Like I've already been past this first part. It shouldn't be like that." But it does because, like I said, you're really trying to focus in on what do you want to do. Like you're taking that step back to say, "Okay, what do I want to focus on? How do I want this to look now?" And that takes a little bit of time because you're thinking a little bit more long term than just, even though I'm doing things to get to promotion, but it's like you still are thinking long term because once you get promotion, then you just doing your thing. So what do you want that to look like? And so I think that was also another thing I wasn't expecting, to feel like I was starting from the beginning again.
Yeah. Wow, starting from the beginning again. This question I wanted to ask earlier, but then we got on another track,
Yes,
which was
yes,
finding mentors, right? So you talked
yes.
a lot about that, and it seems like that has contributed a lot to your success. So for early career faculty, how can they find mentors?
You can find them in so many different places, and I have been very fortunate to have people at different phases for me. Sometimes I wasn't always looking for them; they just kind of popped up, and it just kind of developed over time. But I would say my very first mentor, obviously, when I was younger, was my dad because of all the people that he knew. So he kind of really grew me and my siblings in terms of going in a particular trajectory. And he still is kind of doing that from afar a little bit. He still has his hands in mentorship with
Nice.
us even now and still connecting us with people. But outside of that, it was my dissertation chair. she was really significant in terms of helping me to grow as a researcher. And so, as a result of going to some of the other conferences and different people that she either went to school with or she met as a result of some of the organizations, I was able to connect with some of those people. And they took an interest in what I was doing. I mean, they take an interest in other people's students too. So it's kind of like we're all one big family. And inside of some of those organizations, they may have specific groups that are dedicated to specific groups of people. So that's where a lot of my communication has happened with that. And then it just depends on kind of where you know you want to go. And I've always been very good about knowing where I want to go. And so I'm like, okay, I need to find someone who's there or who is almost there that I can kind of talk to. And so one example of that was I went to a conference to talk about, I think because I'm a Salone scholar too. And so I do a lot of presentations to help with their faculty boot camp and things of that nature. But that's also connected to the Institute on Teaching and Mentoring, which is where a lot of PhD students, minority PhD students come, and they kind of get built back up. They get to talk to people who already had a PhD, all that kind of stuff. And so people who are funded by these different agencies get to come to this meeting. And the people who are finished, they normally do like, because my husband did it this past year, when they finish, they do like a graduation ceremony for all the scholars who finished. So it's like really uplifting. But it was one person who actually came and she spoke. And so I told my husband, I was like, oh, I got to connect with her because I want to do administrative role eventually and I need to know how this works and everything. So
Right.
I connected with her after. She was like, send me a message on LinkedIn. I was like, yeah, I'm your friend on LinkedIn. Sent her a message. We emailed, connected, and talked for like 1 hour. I told her kind of what I wanted to do, and she basically gave me like a roadmap or like a trajectory in 1 hour. And I
Wow.
was like, okay, so I'm still going to stay connected. I haven't reached back out to her recently, but I plan on it because I told her I wanted us to stay connected. But she was like, yes, I would really love to help you get to where you're going now that I know that. But if I never went up to talk to her, because you could be nervous because those type of people feel like untouchable. And so that would be one thing I would say is a lot of those people are not untouchable. Like they want you to come up and talk to them. They want you to share your information so they can kind of stay connected. But the thing that she kind of instilled in me after we had our one-on-one was the power of the follow-up, which we don't always do. I'm not always good at it, but we kind of drop the ball in following up with people who will be beneficial to our trajectory or where we're going. But you have to be kind of like willing to take that risk to actually just reach out to them, whether it's at the conference, whether it's an email because you read some of their work, or you send them a message on LinkedIn. Most people are willing to connect. And all you have to do is know what you want, see someone who can probably provide something to see if they're willing to, take 20, 30 minutes to talk to you. And most of the people that I've reached out to, they've been really good about sharing their expertise or what I wanted to know about, and it's been helpful to me.
Yeah, that's so fantastic, and I thank you for that wonderful example. I talk about networking quite a bit. People get nervous of that word, but I'm like, you don't even have to use that word. You can just call it relationship building. You can call it
Right,
mentorship, right? But whatever it is, this whatever wherever you're building your career, it's not a one man sport. It's a team sport, right?
right,
And when you start getting people in your corner who can mentor you, who can, give you the ropes, or even like sometimes they don't give you the ropes, but they connect you to somebody that may give you that.
right.
It is
Exactly.
amazing. So thank you so much for sharing that anecdote. If people want to get in touch with you, where should they go?
Yes. So I am on Instagram, Dr. Jessie Talley. I'm also on LinkedIn, so that's Jessie Talley, PhD. I also have a website, which is my name, jessielbtalley.com. And then I also have a YouTube channel called Academic Insights. So, and then my email address is jessie@engineerculture.com. So But if you go to my website, you'll be able to use the contact form to reach out to me. And then I work at Morgan State University, so you can always reach out to me at that academic email as well.
Absolutely. And I'll make sure to leave all that information here. Thank you so much, Dr. Jessie Ty. This was a great conversation.
Definitely. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.